1980s. They're still active. This is a group of women artists who have been persistent in their critique of art museums for gender bias, I guess you could call it. The idea that uh, uh, the art that you see, if you go to the Wadsworth Atheneum, 99% of the art on the walls was by men. And you could say, well, is that because women didn't make art? Actually, no. It's because the power structure of, and the people that donated things and the staff that chose things weren't educated about what kinds of opportunities, things that women were making, or they didn't like it. And I love that February is Black History Month and March is Women's History Month. What happens the rest of the year? So they do a lot of what I would call controversial pushing. Have a seat.
I will.
But your buttons. Now,
Is there everything I need here?
no.
Okay.
The amazing thing, and I don't think this was necessarily planned to coordinate with the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, but there have been more exhibitions in museums around the country of women artists who we should have been paying attention to all along but didn't. And I'm just going to give you a couple examples. Jane, these aren't necessarily household, yeah.
I'm sorry, I came in late and I have two more friends coming.
Yeah.
What was the overarching topic here?
Oh, women's art.
Okay, because we're from Connecticut Women Artists.
Yeah, see, that's the title.
Okay, so does it have anything to do with the show we're having?
I don't know what you're doing, so
From 1929,
yes,
it's gonna be at the University of St. Joseph.
that's good.
And I just didn't know how much they do you know Gary Noble?
Yeah, I do,
Okay,
very well.
because he worked on our show.
Fabulous.
So I just didn't know how different.
I think it's going to overlap a little bit.
It's gonna
Probably not
overlap a little bit, but no.
maybe a lot.
Okay, well,
And-
sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt,
No,
but I
it's
just wanted to
great.
get a sense
And
of.
Gary Noble, I'm glad you brought him up because
Yeah.
he has been relentless at researching these sometimes forgotten women artists, and I'm
Yep.
real interested in it. And my point that I was making is that there have been these wonderful retrospective exhibits. First exhibits of this type ever
Mhm.
in the past 3 or 4 years, and it's picking up. The Brooklyn Museum, the Baltimore Art Museum, Boston Museum of Fine Arts have all, the Baltimore Art Museum has dedicated the entire year to all of the acquisitions they're going to make by women artists.
Right.
So there's a lot of catch-up going on. And Jane Peterson here, who was, this was an exhibit that was in New York and actually at the Mattituck Museum in Waterbury.
Oh.
And she's what you might call an American impressionist. And she captured, what the Impressionists did, they would seek out these extraordinary places and portray them, paint them. And so it was, a lot of it was about searching for beauty on the horizon. This was an exhibit up at the Springfield Museum, Art Museum, Isabel Bishop. So again, these legacies, these stories are being rediscovered, and the work of these sometimes forgotten women artists are being presented in a really interesting way. This is Irma Cohn, and again, this is an artist rediscovered. She also was an impressionist who, and a lot of these that I happen to be showing were women artists who, worked in New England. New England wasn't the only home of this kind of work, but these were some of them. And then this is my favorite. I actually wrote an article for Connecticut Explorer about Anne Rogers Minor. And she lived in Waterford, Connecticut. She was also an impressionist. And her claim to fame, even more than her art, is that she was the President General of the Daughters of the American Revolution at the absolute height of their power in the 1920s. And so she had tremendous executive ability, and where she got time to paint, I don't know, but she was also a businesswoman who made money, not a huge fortune, but a decent fortune in the real estate business, catering to tourists down on the coast. She had a couple little tourist hotels that she operated, and that was Ann Meyer. And then this was great, Natalie Van Vleck. This was an exhibit at the Mattituck Museum, and there is a Flanders Nature Center in Waterbury is something that she created. She was a philanthropist and somebody very interested in nature and animals, but she also was a painter. And I love the picture in the center there. It looks a little like Picasso, Cubism, but it's, she was more in the 1920s and 30s and doing a little bit of abstract work. And then if you get a chance, run, don't walk. This Eve Kahn is giving a talk at the Ishu Terry House in Hartford on March 15th. And she is an electrifying speaker. She was formerly the editor, one of the art critics for the New York Times, and she discovered this incredible collection of art and letters and manuscripts about Mary Rogers Williams, whose picture portrayed in the upper right there, and these were some of her paintings. She started out, she's interesting, she started out working for what became the Hartford Art School. She was born in Hartford, raised in Hartford, and she taught at the Hartford Art School, and then for 25 years ran the gallery and also taught at Smith College. But this book that Eve Kahn has written is, I couldn't put it down. It was one of the best biographies of any artist I've ever read. And she just, she really, Eve Kahn, the writer, captured the life of Mary Rogers Williams in the most fascinating way. She painted in France. She knew everybody that was anybody in the art world in that period. And she also faced some very real discrimination. I mean, it really, if you're interested in women's rights and how inclusive the world is or isn't, this book is for you. And it's going to be a book signing and also a lecture at the Isham House in Hartford on March 15th.
Is it a recent book?
Brand new.
Fabulous.
Yeah, it's brand new, 6 months.
Super.
I wrote a review of it. I was so excited about it.
In the Connecticut Explorer?
No, that's going to be in Connecticut History, which is the journal of the Association for the Study of Connecticut History.
Okay.
And it's probably, I hope the East Hartford Public Library gets that. It's it's a really good journal, Connecticut History, and they do book reviews. So I wrote one about Eve Kahn's book. And these are, I love this stuff. This is Margaret Cooper, and these are all women. I mean, to do a major show that would pick the highlights from all of these women would be the most interesting thing you'd ever see at Wadsworth Atheneum. Some of you may know, I know Holly knows that some months ago, well, I guess I spoke about it here, I gave developed a program and did research on the history. Last year was the 100th anniversary of Travelers Tower, which when it was new, was the 7th largest building in the world.
Wow, amazing.
And this whole study, if you ever get a chance to go to New York, we were there a couple weeks ago, and the Skyscraper Museum, which nobody in this room has ever heard of, I'd never heard of it, but it's really interesting about real estate and housing and why New York went up, and all these, these were the Woolworth building when it was new in 1913, was the tallest building in the world. And this is a painting by Margaret Cooper, and it's at the Town and County Club, which is a women's club in Hartford.
Oh, Cooper, we know her, Margaret Cooper.
But this is a great, it's one of my very favorite scenes of Hartford. And it shows Bushnell Park when the Park River was still running through the center of town.
The
So,
Hog River, right?
yeah, well, you can call it that, sure.
Did you say that was Margaret
Yeah.
Cooper?
That's what my
And then Amelia Watson lived in East Windsor Hill, Connecticut, and she did these incredible watercolors, did a lot of what I would call history, paintings of historic scenes. She also taught at the Hartford Art School. So these are names, if you, don't quote me, but go ahead.
I
If
can't
you were
keep up with
to ask the curator of American art
Yeah.
at the Wadsworth Atheneum, name any of these artists, they just draw a blank.
Right,
They never
I
heard of
know.
them. And they were not only great, just look at the stuff, but they were, in some cases, right here. So this shows you the room has got to go.
Okay.
Then, I loved it. Some years ago, I gave a talk in Sudbury, Mass.
Yeah.
And when I give lectures in places I've never been, I sometimes ask my hosts if there's a local museum or collection. I like to see what else there is around town. And they said, well, the Garden Club owns a house that was given to them by this Florence Hosmer, shown here. And we'll get you in there. You have a look. Well, I thought my 20 miles to Boston, I guarantee you, nobody at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston has ever heard of Florence Hosmer. These paintings are great, and the thing is, they have 400 of them.
Wow. Oh,
Because
my God.
some of these, not just women, it's true also of men, some of the 19th and early 20th century artists didn't really need the money.
Right.
And so, you know, they maybe they thought selling their art was a little below them.
Yeah.
Right.
So she just painted and painted because she loved it. She loved the scene. She'd go up to Rockport, you know, hang out with the other artists. And one of the things she did that is so amazing, I don't think a man could ever pull it off. They weren't that far from Salem, Mass. And Salem was famous for these old landed families, these aristocratic families. And by 1900, 1910, there were a number of, I don't know what you call them, old maids, spinsters, whatever, but women who
Grand dames.
grand dames, yes, had a lot of money, but maybe didn't have a husband.
Right.
And she met these women
Yeah.
and got them to sit for her and portray them.
Isn't that so?
And they're really interesting. And I think that when I'm dead and gone, that people will still be talking about this art more 30 years from now than even now. And then you've got, of course, you know, one of the most iconic figures of the 20th century was
Oh, yeah.
Grandma Moses. And
Right.
has anybody ever been to Bennington
Yes.
Museum? Fabulous place. And they've got the great collection of Grandma Moses' work. And she was so famous. She was like Norman Rockwell, so famous in the 1950s that, you know, the President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower, entertained her at the White House. And, you know, she was great. She was from Vermont. She painted local color scenes. This is a little obscure, but in other words, the scholarship is beginning to pick up. This was done in the 2005, I think. The Allen sisters were photographers. They also were artists. They were based in Deerfield. And their photography collection has, a lot of it has survived intact. And actually, their work there was a whole retrospective about the Allen sisters at Florence Griswold Museum. And this is a book that was produced. So we're getting there. And then I love this. I think it's still up at the Norfolk, Connecticut Historical Society, Litchfield County. The photographs of Marie Kendall. She was, first off, they've got this incredible collection of her work. She exhibited at the World's Fair in 1893 in Chicago, and they've written a book about her, and the Historical Society has an exhibit of her work. So, you know, it's great stuff. Then there were women sculptors like Harriet Hosmer, pretty famous, and her work is in major museums, like the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Wadsworth Atheneum, I think, has a piece by her. And then Evelyn Longman.
Yes, she's so great.
Isn't she great?
Love her.
We love her, right?
She's ours, yeah.
And she did these great World War I and Spanish-American War monuments. Her studio is still intact at Loomis Chaffee School because she eventually married this guy Batchelder, who was the headmaster of Loomis Chaffee, Loomis School.
She's all right.
And she was famous as a